Okay, I am really happy for the chance to be speaking with Phil Mitchell today. He's a counselor and a psychotherapist with over 17 years of experience. And he is a specialist in helping men and boys who have survived sexual abuse. He's also an incredibly kind and generous and intelligent man, and is a great example of that you can find kindness and bravery in one person. So, let's go to the first question. Now, this might sound frustrating because given that this is what you do for a living, some people might be surprised to learn that there are male victims of sexual abuse. Just walk us through what you know of the issue.
Well, that's quite a big walkthrough. So first of all, thank you for that introduction. It was very, very nice. I feel like I should pay you for such an introduction. Well, I guess, yeah, Pete, I think we are better than we were. So if we go back maybe 10, 20 years ago, yes, there's, in my experience, there's a lot more people saying it doesn't really happen to boys and men. It's an issue mainly affecting girls and women. I think we are better now, but I think we've still got a long way to go. There are, and just this week, I've encountered people that have gone, it doesn't really happen to boys and men. And I think what we do is we put too much focus on the data, or more accurately, we interpret the data in a certain way. So when we talk about the various forms of sexual abuse, it's a form of harm that is easy to keep hidden. So when you talk about murder, you know, it's not the sort of crime someone can perpetrate and easily hide. Whereas abuse, there are power games, there are dynamics, there's coercive control, there's lots of different elements to it, lots of different interpretations and perceptions, and those contribute towards the sexual abuse being hidden. But then what we do is we look at data. We look in the UK at the Office of National Statistics. We look at the CDC in the States, and we look at what all the data says. And what people do is they look at the data and they go, it's happening a lot more to girls and women than boys and men. My response to that is no, it's being identified more when it happens to girls and women than boys and men, and girls and women are disclosing it and reporting it more than boys and men. That does not mean it's hardly happening to boys and men. And I think it is factual and accurate to say the data shows that female victims are disclosing more, being identified more, and so on. And they're doing that more than boys and men. It doesn't mean it's hardly happening to boys and men. Rather than look at the data and interpret as, well, factually, it means it's happening more to women than men. I think what we should be doing is going, why are boys and men not disclosing? Rather than assuming the lower figures of male victims factually means it's not happening to them. It doesn't. And I think one of the interesting things is language, because if you, so here in the UK, for example, the Office of National Statistics that is linked to the Crime in England and Wales survey, they ask questions about sexual abuse, sexual harm, and things like that. Last time I checked, they did not ask the question about men being forced to penetrate. They asked a vague question that some could argue incorporates that, but they did not specifically ask the question, have you ever been forced to penetrate? Okay, the CDC in America, they do ask that question. And the fact they asked that question, and the number of men, I think 16 upwards it is, males at 16, saying, yes, I have been forced to penetrate, was massively high. In, I think, 2012, I believe it was. Don't quote me on that, I might not get it right. But I think in 2012, more men said they were forced to penetrate than women said they were raped. Now, obviously, there's lots of other context to consider there, and that. But what's really interesting is when that information is shared, the amount of people that get offended at that. Really? And I think people are getting offended because it's the interpretation by some is that we are taking victimhood away from girls and women, and we're giving it all to boys and men. That's not how victimhood works. It's about saying there are issues disproportionately affecting girls and women. There are issues disproportionately affecting boys and men. There are issues affecting all. But there's the differences. But I think the point I'm saying is, or the question I'm asking is, if here in the UK, we asked the question to men, have you ever been forced to penetrate? I wonder if we would see findings similar to that of the CDC.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, like, it sounds like what you're describing is one of the problems might be that they're not asking the right questions.
Absolutely. And there's a massive thing with
That
questions.
it's not just about, are they disclosing?
Yeah, you ask a man, have you ever been a victim of sexual abuse or violence? Many will go, no. You ask the same men, have you, has a woman ever forced you to penetrate her? Many will go, yeah. And it's because of the language we use. And men, certainly in my experience, and I think there is some literature to back this up, they don't necessarily engage with sort of victim language. So rather than going, what happened to you? You know, you are a victim of abuse. It's okay to be vulnerable. Men, in my experience, will engage more with an approach that goes, what happened to you was abusive, it was bad, it was awful, it shouldn't have happened to you. So again, you might not even use the word victim. As a practitioner, you should treat them and respond to them as a victim, but you might not use that word victim because it can just put people off, or can put some people off.
Yeah. So what I'm wondering if maybe forced to penetrate is a bit vague in terms of what that means. Some people might not understand what that means.
No, I think that's a good point. I think I think because in the grand scheme of things, to some people it seems as such an alien concept. What do you mean? How does that work? And you know, whereas rape is what rape is. But even then, some people get confused in the legal definition of rape. Yeah. Other definitions, you know, any forced sex is rape. Well, legally that's not true. So again, it does get a bit confusing. But yeah, I think maybe the term forced to penetrate, it might be a little bit vague. It might be a bit confusing to some, but I think the language matters. And sometimes whether you're a police officer, a social worker, a therapist, whatever your role is, it's always useful to think about the language and using what emerging literature is saying, male-friendly language.
Yeah. Well, I also think that when you use the words rape and sexual assault, there's an implication of something extremely violent, which it could very well be, but it might not. But that's the categories we're using. It seems to be either an extremely violent connotation or a slightly confusing one.
A number of men and a few boys that I've worked with over the years have said one of the reasons, as many, but one of the reasons they never disclosed to anyone or to police, for example, some of them have said is because it was all about promoting end sexual violence, man or woman, end sexual violence, disclose sexual violence. And the guys, some of the guys I've spoken to, but it wasn't violent. It wasn't. I don't class it as sexual violence because I wasn't physically harmed, or the physical harm I suffered was minor. And so men who I've worked with, and sometimes where they have been forced to penetrate, or they have been coerced or threatened into sexual stuff they did not want to do. Yeah. Some of them, a lot actually, in my experience, it was not violent. And I think sometimes there can be, or some people believe there can be a difference between the definition of violence and sexual violence. It can be, you can be sexually abused, but it's not sexually violent. Others would say all sexual abuse is sexual violence. And again, we get really into different interpretations and all of that sort of stuff, but sometimes simplifying it. And I often say to guys I work with, if you were a woman and the person who did this to you was a man, would that be different? 9 times out of 10, you always say, oh yeah, that would be different. Okay, why would it be different? What's that about? And you can explore those thoughts.
So it sounds like what you're saying is it's a lot more pervasive than a lot of people want to admit.
Yes, I believe so. I mean, I've worked with numerous boys and men that have been sexually abused, raped as adults, as children, as both, by men, by women. I cannot be the only therapist, the only practitioner in the entire world that is surprised at what I'm seeing. There are others as well. I think what's really interesting, though, is, and I shared something a few weeks ago online where I said, in my opinion, I actually believe that, that men are abusing women at similar rates to women are abusing men. It's just that we hear a lot more about it when men do this to women. Women disclose more than men, and that's my opinion. And I actually think if we knew everything, that we'd see roughly equal rates, in my opinion, based. Oh, the amount of hate I got, the amount of hassle, one death threat. Just one, which was nice, compared to the others I've had before. But again, it was like, if you disagree, fine, you disagree. But that's a bit, and I think what's happened is you get some people that want to hog victimhood rather than sharing it and going, we all experience these disadvantages to different extremes, different severities, different levels.
As if compassion is a limited resource.
Exactly, absolutely. But yeah, I think it happens a lot more to boys and men, and arguably there are reasons specific to boys and men that won't disclose. So I think Richard Gartner in his book and others literature since have talked about the three main reasons boys and men don't often disclose that specifically relate to being male, that is a bit different to female victims. Is one, fear of being seen as gay. If you're a heterosexual male, you don't want to be seen as gay if you perpetrate as male. Two, threat to your masculinity. So if your masculinity important, but again, what's your perception of your masculinity and all that? Yeah. And three, fear of being falsely accused and being labelled as the perpetrator when you're the victim. And there are arguably more examples, anecdotally perhaps, I'm not sure, but there are arguably more examples of men who have been abused by women where the woman has falsely claimed victimhood and says she's the victim than the other way around. And I think that's the thing. What we have is that we do have some women, the minority, thankfully, but we do have some women where they do manipulate and weaponize victimhood to abuse a man. And I think what happens is you get, I've heard it time and time again where police go to an address. There's been an altercation. The man is automatically arrested, no questions asked. It's like, well, hang on a minute, she was hitting
the same thing here in Canada.
Exactly. Yeah, I hear all the people in Australia have been in touch with me, told the same thing. Some in India and all of that. And there is that. Well, hang on a minute. Wait a minute. What's going on here? How is your perception of gender affecting things here? So yes, I believe it is a lot more pervasive. And if you just look at the CDC data, that says it all. And I do not believe it is reasonable or rational to say that America is the only place that will have this happening. Perhaps America is one of the main places that highlights this happening because of the language they use.
Yeah. So, well, we already have a lot of support groups for women. I'm wondering if you think they should be expanded to include men, or do you think we need a parallel system to take care of it?
It's interesting. So there's the two schools of thought that I often encounter are it should all be gender neutral, and others are that no, it should be male specific and female specific. I can see pros and cons to both. I generally lean a little bit more towards the have something male specific, just because there's a wealth of science and research and literature over years that says that on average males prefer this way of working and females prefer this way of working. That's not bad, that's not wrong, that's just average differences as highlighted by science. I managed a project a few years ago, and the point of the project was that we worked with 20 child sexual exploitation services from the south of England to the north of England. Okay. And the point was we developed services. They were all working with loads of girls. Some were working with no boys. Some had very little boys. So we wanted to get more boys referred. And thankfully, at the start of that project, those 20 services were cumulatively working with 91 boys. When we finished with working with them, they were working with 249 boys. So that kind of tells us that if you adopt a proactive approach, then you can absolutely get the boys referred and find them. But you've got to be more proactive. You've got to challenge gender-biased practice. But what we did is we spoke to a few boys within that project, and some of them, I think it was most of them actually, that said, we're not really bothered if we go to see a service that works with girls and boys. You've just got to be explicitly welcoming of us as boys. Don't add us on as an afterthought. Don't give us like a second-rate service. See us as just valuable and as just as valid as the girls. But I do think, and if you read, there's some great literature and there's some fantastic psychologists out there pioneering work for boys and men. You've got Martin Seeger out there. You've got John Barry. There's Louise Liddon. There's Deborah Powney. There's Nicola Graham Kevin. They're all talking, and again, there's more I haven't mentioned, but they're all talking about the issues affecting boys and men. And if you look at the literature and the research, it kind of says that, well, on average, boys and men prefer this sort of approach and girls and women prefer this sort of approach. It doesn't mean that boys should only ever be offered this sort of approach, just like girls and women should not only be ever offered this sort of approach. It just means on average, they're the differences we see. So if they're the average differences, we should surely take that into account when we are developing services for boys and men.
Well, I would imagine in a therapeutic setting that it would be kind of expected that you would tailor your approach to the individual client.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you've got to be mindful about how are you going to tailor that approach, and are you competent? Are you qualified enough? Are you experienced enough? Are you knowledgeable enough? So there's all of that ethical stuff to consider as well. But I think often what we have, and my experience is, you will see, or you hear a lot of therapists going, "Well, this guy, he just needs to sit down. He needs to talk about his feelings. He needs to express. He needs to open up." And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. What I am saying is that the problem is saying that one size should fit everyone you're working with. Yeah. No, and it's like, no, you just need to sit. And I said, well, actually, a lot of men and boys will prefer an action-orientated, solution-focused, problem-solving thing, different sort of language. And one of the things I spoke to someone a while ago, I said, so you're basically encouraging these men to avoid the need to fix a problem, find a solution, solve something, and you're encouraging them to sit and express their emotions. Mm-hmm. Yes, I am. Okay. Would you be encouraging girls and women to stop focusing on their emotions and focus on fixing the problem and coming up with a solution? No, that's absolutely terrible. That's misogyny. That's abuse. Yeah, like, hang on a minute. Whoa. What you're doing is you're acknowledging the general differences. You're acknowledging the general preference that females generally prefer, but when boys and men generally prefer this, you're kind of saying that's a problem. Why? And actually, maybe a mixture of both is probably a good answer. But if you've got a client, a boy or a man, who is not responding to the emotional approach, empathy and all of that, or he's not responding to just that, don't just give him that. And one of the things, certainly when I read the amazing Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology a few years ago, I changed my practice massively. And it absolutely, my website, I don't think it was that fluffy, but I had with come to therapy, talk about your feelings, that sort of thing. And that's still a part of what I do. But actually, when I changed it and I changed the language to take control of your life, take action. So I saw a significant increase in men getting in touch for therapy, because that's what they wanted. That wording attracted them, and they, in the main, achieved something pretty useful out of therapy, because they were open to being challenged, open to different perspectives. But the male-friendly language that was used attracted them, and I just thought this really does work.
Yeah. The way I like to think of it as women are human beings, men are doing beings.
Yeah, I mean, someone else, that's been said a few times by quite a few people, and I absolutely see where it comes from, from a societal point of view, from a biological point of view. I get it. I guess I'm always a little bit wary, because I know that sometimes people get offended. There's more to men than that. There's more to women than that, and there is. But if we simplify it, I see where you're coming from.
It's something that could be easily misinterpreted.
Yes, but absolutely. But I think we have to adapt our practice, and I think it's one of the main reasons boys and men don't engage with services. So when we talk about the sexual abuse of boys and men, there's 4 things that I often talk about. Sexually abused boys and men are less likely to be identified by professionals as experiencing or being at risk of experiencing abuse. They are less likely to recognize they have been or are being abused. They are less likely to disclose the abuse, and then they're less likely to engage with services. And what we are doing generally as a society is not very much about that. What we are doing is we are focusing, I would say we are magnifying what I call the female victim, male perpetrator narrative. And it's like, hang on a minute, we know that girls and women are disclosing more than boys and men. We know they're engaging with services more than boys and men. We know that. What we're doing to help boys and men, we're not. We're focusing on how they're bad and how they're perpetrators. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely appalling. And so if you think about boys, so here in the UK, we have sort of child sexual exploitation teams, child sexual exploitation hubs, and things like that. When a girl displays certain warning signs, such as going missing, not at school, being dropped off at the end of the street in a taxi with a guy that, we don't know who he is. Is she being groomed? Is she being sexually exploited? Let's do a risk assessment. Let's see. But then you go into another situation where you see a boy the same age, not at school, going missing. He's been seen at the end of the street, dropped off by a man or an older adult. Many will not view the risk of CSE in the same way as they do with the girls. They will often think, child sexual exploitation for the girl, criminal exploitation for the boy, despite the fact that the scenarios are identical, with the only difference being the gender. So the question is, how is your perception of gender affecting your assessment of risk? And if we think about it, what we do there is, so even then, they are less likely to be identified as victims or potential victims. But then, even when if they are identified, the boys and men themselves are less likely to recognize they are being abused, especially if the perpetrator is a woman, especially if it's there are other issues there, such as language being used that stops them, right? And what have they been told about abuse? So they're less likely to be identified, less likely to recognize it. Even if they do recognize it, they're less likely to disclose it because of lots of reasons around sort of perceptions of masculinity, fear of being gay, label of perpetrator, all of that.
Yeah.
And where do they go? Is there a male-friendly service? And then even if they do disclose, they're less likely to engage with services, because the services are predominantly set up for girls and women, not boys and men. And some of these services have got very problematic, and I would say very harmful, views about boys and men in general. Yeah. And so so the question is, what are we doing about this? Well, as a society, my answer is not much. There are people out there speaking very loudly and very assertively to try and change it and to try and tackle it, but there's a long way to go. But I think it gives the message that boys and men just don't matter as much as girls and women, and that's the harmful message. It shouldn't be one matters, one doesn't. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be as black as white, as you're good, you're bad, you're a victim, you're a perpetrator, you matter, you don't. It's not as black and white as that. And I think rather than promoting this rigid black and white thinking, we need to embrace the grey a bit more.
Yeah, no, it's a terrible thing to put on anybody. Are there any obstacles that you can think of that you haven't already mentioned that would prevent a man or a boy from seeking out help?
Well, I mean, I think I've probably mentioned a lot of them already in very vague terms. Yeah. But I think there is, I think it's when, so let's just say if a young man is going into a service, he walks into the waiting room, he sits in the waiting room, and it's bright pink walls, My Little Pony and dolls in the corner to play with, a poster on over here, the girls group this Thursday, lots of pink glittery magazines here. Again, he could interpret that as, I don't belong here, I shouldn't be here, this is not a place for me, and I need to go somewhere else. I think, again, it's about making sure we adapt our service and practice so it's accessible and inclusive of boys. And I do some training on that. I do some webinars on that. But I think that what you get is you get people with very well-meaning views going, no, we will just be open as possible. We will be very neutral. We'll open everyone. And that's very well-meaning, but sometimes you might be more effective if you just acknowledge the science and acknowledge that there are, in general, differences between the preferences that boys and men want and girls and women want. And there's a massive amount of science to back that up. And not only that, but loads of examples from practice as well. And I think, sadly, people get offended when you look at the science. And science isn't meant to be offensive. It's just science. It's there. It's just what science says. It's about average differences in all of that sort of stuff. Yeah. So if you're working with someone, a boy or a girl, and they respond to a emotional or a predominantly emotional response where they express their emotions and they cry and they say how they feel, fine, nothing wrong with that. If you are, whether that's a boy or a girl, if you're working with someone and they respond more effective to a solution-focused, action-orientated sort of movement approach and they respond, that's fine as well. But I think what a lot of people do is they try and fit all children, all adults into this emotional one. Rather than going, well, this has also got validity. A mixture of both is arguably a good way to be. But it's a case of, if I've worked with so many people over the years where they've said, this boy just isn't engaging with me. And when you listen to the words and what's going on, it can sometimes look like the reason the boy is not engaging is because you are using an approach that generally works with girls and women, generally speaking. What about being more action-orientated, solution-focused? And some people will go, well, that's just really bad, isn't it? We need to be encouraging boys and men to express their emotions. Well, I can see what you're doing, but actually that's not it. Even if a boy and man goes, I'm sitting here and I feel sad and I'm feeling sad and I'm expressing my sadness. Right, now what do we do? Well, what about just sitting with that sadness? Again, for some boys and men, that's good. I would always say, identify your emotion, express your emotion, and accept it, So identify it, accept it, and express it, right? But do it safely and appropriately and all of that. That's okay, but you can add to that with a solution-focused approach. But sadly, some people often say, but that's really bad, isn't it? Why is it bad? And no one can say why it's bad. There's all these sort of ideological assumptions, or there's, yes, but if it's not just a pure 100% emotional focused approach, that's bad. No, it's not. What's bad is thinking that that rigid approach should work for every single person you work with.
Do they ever say why it's bad?
Well, some have said to me in the past that it's toxic masculinity, and I laugh when
Really?
I say that, because that, and that's just, I mean, I can't. There's just no logic behind that. It's basically saying, well, yeah, but men, you said it yourself, men are often seen as human doings, not beings. Well, they need to just be rather than do. Why do they? Why? Who says? What do you mean? What? Why? Why? You know, would we be saying to girls and women, no, you need to stop being and start doing more? Oh no, you won't be able to say that. And it's like, why can't we just accept the average differences? And I think it's because a lot of the training focuses on open questions and an emotional focused approach and all that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with it. You try it with girls and boys, and if it works, great. But if it doesn't work, stop thinking there's something wrong with the boy because he's not engaging with that approach. Start looking at yourself and thinking, do I need to change my approach and be more solution focused, action orientated? And you may be surprised at the results if you are.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you approach someone who's thinking of getting help and maybe they don't think they need it, or maybe they don't believe it'll help?
Okay. Well, there's loads of response to that. I guess, first of all, I'd be wondering, what is it that's prompted them to consider getting help or not getting help? So what's happened? Have they been thinking about something?
I was thinking like maybe a situation like maybe someone who's struggling. Something big.
So someone who acknowledges that they experienced abuse and are struggling with it. Yeah. Okay. Well, I would, again, I think for me, again, it would be two things. Well, there's lots of things, but two main things that come to mind right now. One, if you went and engaged with some sort of help or support, what does a positive outcome for you look like? Is it that you're more confident, less anxious? Is it that you go to work because you've been off sick for a while? You know, what does a positive outcome for you look like? And I guess in very simple terms, if we're talking about a therapist here, for example, what sort of qualities do you want from your therapist? What do you not want from your therapist? Yeah. So certainly in the last year and a bit, I've had a few boys, young men and other men get in touch with me on Twitter privately saying, Phil, this is my situation. I really think I need help, but actually I want a male-friendly therapist. And I often say, okay, what does that mean to you? Because I know what it means to me. But I go, what does it mean to you having a male-friendly? I don't mean tell me why. So what is a male-friendly therapist to you? And you get, well, I want someone who's not going to be saying my masculinity is toxic. I don't want someone who says toxic. I don't want someone who is who thinks boys and men are all part of the patriarchy and they've got inherent privilege and power and all of that and so on and so on. It's like, right, okay, yep, get that, okay. Simply put, tell your therapist that. So when you're looking for a therapist, then do a bit of shopping around, speak to people, have a 10-minute chat with them on the phone, that sort of thing, and just say, look, I'm looking for someone who kind of has these views and doesn't have these views, and who's will, you know, I want to be in a room with someone and I want to get a vibe and a sense from them that they don't think men are bad because they're men, that they don't think masculinity is toxic or can be, and all of that. It's that sort of thing. So I think ultimately it's about what's the methods that you are interested in, what's the outcome that you want, and tell your therapist that, and they will hopefully be honest with you and go, nah, that's not me. Okay, take care, all the best. Or they go, yeah, I think I can do that. So it's about that honest and clear communication.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That answers my next question too.
Okay.
Unless you have anything more to add about what kind of things a person should be looking for in a man or a boy should be looking for in a therapist.
Well, again, I think, you know, I'm not sure if I'd say boys and men should be looking for this. I think it's just about they should be communicating what they want clearly, and what one boy or man wants might be very different to what another boy or man wants. It might be that someone just wants to sit there and offload and shout and scream and cry and have someone listen to them and believe them and empathize with them.
Yeah.
Fine. It might be that someone wants more of a suggestion and action oriented solution approach. That's fine. It might be that someone wants a mixture of both. It might be that someone wants something else. But it's about them thinking, what do I want? How do I want it? And what's the outcome? And communicating that clearly to the therapist, so the therapist can make an informed decision about, yeah, I'm right for you, or no, I don't think I am, based on that. So yeah, it is that sort of clear communication. I think services, though, sort of big, wide charities and organisations, some of those perhaps need to reflect on how do they appear, how accessible and inclusive are they of boys and men as victims or potential victims or people that experience disadvantage. Do they promote the whole, it's an issue affecting girls and women, not boys and men? Because if they do, I would be thinking, how does that filter into their work, their practice? If it's all very girls, oh yeah, but boys, well, hang on a minute, no, that you've added them on as an afterthought. So again, it doesn't mean that they should dismiss the fact that some boys and men abuse. It doesn't mean they should give girls and women a terrible lesser. No, it means you've got to be acknowledging, fair, accessible, and think if you are thinking we really do a good job of welcoming girls and women and making our service inclusive of and accessible to them, great. Do you do that with boys and men? And if you do, where's the evidence to say that? Yeah. And speak to boys and men and ask them what they want.
What are some of the, you mentioned earlier, like be missing school and being dropped off anonymously by some stranger. Are there any other warning signs that people should recommend they look for?
So some of them are a bit tricky because some of them can be typical teenage behavior.
Yeah.
You've got a young person, they're being a bit more secretive, they're spending time in the room more, they're on the phone, they don't like it when you speak, they're staying out later. All of that could be signs that something's not right. It could be signs of just typical teenage behavior. It's really tricky. One of the things that I always encourage people to think about is if you've got a young person and they're suddenly very happy and they're very excited, but there's no reason as to why, or the reason is a bit unusual or don't make sense. Yeah. Some people go, yeah, but they're happy, so it's fine. Yeah, but why are they happy? Is it happy because they have got an older boyfriend or girlfriend and that's what's keeping them happy and they don't recognize it as abuse? But you've got standard signs. So if you look at websites such as Barnardo's, the NSPCC, the Children's Society, loads out there, you've got all the signs that alert us, and I've got to be careful. There's different signs as well. So the signs that alert us to it's looking likely that abuse has happened, or it's looking like abuse might be happening. Yeah. And might this is where the important. Yeah. Yeah. So again, for example, if you've got going missing, running away, not telling people where you are, you're not in school, your whereabouts are unknown, you've been secretive about your whereabouts, you've been seen associating with someone who's a bit older than you and you're secretive, or you're kind of lying about who they are, you've got gifts, drugs, new mobile phones, items that you are secretive about how you acquired, or you come up with some ridiculous excuse about how you got them, sort of physical injuries, or all of these things go, okay, this could be sexual abuse and exploitation. It could be something else. The point is that when you see a girl displaying these signs, many professionals go, potential sexual exploitation, assess. Boy, potential criminal exploitation. Yes, assess, but it will be, we're going to assess the boy for criminal exploitation. We're going to assess the girl for sexual exploitation. The point is that this boy who may be being criminally exploited could get arrested. It goes on his record, all of that. It has an effect in the future, DBS checks, all of that. But I think often what happens, we criminalize the boy and we victimize the girl. And some boys and men, sadly, and while they won't use this language, they'd rather be seen as criminals than victims. Yeah. And so we have to think about the language that we use. But if we see children displaying these behaviors, we should not think, well, that's a boy, so it means criminal exploitation. That's a girl, so let's think sexual exploitation. We need to be open to both and not be using gender to our perceptions of gender to affect our assessment of risk.
What about adults?
Same thing. I mean, again, there's a different dynamic. There's perhaps a different type of safeguarding element from a legal point of view, but it's. I
would imagine it'd be harder to identify an adult who has experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think it comes back to talking to, like, same with young people, actually, as I'm saying it. Are you all right? You seem a bit down. You seem a bit quiet. What's going on? Are you all right? Sort of delving in, all that sort of asking the questions, what's happening. I think what I've certainly found is with some boys and men, rather than saying, when they have disclosed, rather than saying it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to feel this way, yes, you are a victim, it's about going, okay, this is you now starting to take control. Yeah. What and so using different language. So again, it doesn't, I'm not saying it makes it easy for them, no such thing, but it makes it less distressing when you're taking control. You've just done something and said something that's very difficult, that requires strength, and you've done it, and now this is the start of you taking control. You're in charge now. And I find that a number of boys and men I've worked with over the years, certainly in recent years, have found that approach much more beneficial and helpful than it's okay to sit here and be vulnerable. It's okay to sit here. Some have found that useful, absolutely. But generally speaking, it's kind of the other. So if someone is kind of in your life and you notice that they've been a bit down, it doesn't mean they've been abused. Of course it doesn't. But if they are, it's kind of, are you all right? Do you want to kind of talk? We might be able to kind of, figure this out, fix things, or kind of, so again, you use it as like, fix things, solve things, take action, that sort of thing. And I think for a number of boys and men, that approach can be certainly very attractive than other approaches.
Yeah, for sure. You kind of touched on some of this earlier as well, but I'm wondering if there's part of the problem with this issue is that maybe the ways in which men and women abuse each other, like you said, because therapeutic approaches work differently on average, that there might be different ways in which men and women abuse each other that make it harder to identify it as abuse.
Yeah, I mean,
and also, there might be also different ways that men and women process this abuse.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I totally agree with all of that. Yeah. I think on average, generally speaking, yes, men will process things differently. Women might process things differently, but there are similarities, of course, as well. We're talking about average differences. But if we go to the abuse, there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect. They're generally the four areas that highlight on a sort of major safeguarding training. But I think often what happens is that when there's so much ideology behind this. So I had a conversation, if that's the right word, with someone online the other day who said that Amber Heard did not abuse Johnny Depp. She did not abuse him. Okay. And I said, well, here's the recordings. She's clearly saying, I was hitting you. She's saying, I was throwing pots and pans at you. She's saying, I started physical fights with you, and I can't promise I won't do it again. Is that not initiating physical abuse? And I said, no, because it wasn't a pattern. There were different types of abuse and different behaviors within that. It wasn't over it was in a short period of time, not a long period of time, and that was in response to Johnny's abuse. Now, apart from the fact that's just extreme lengths to go to try and minimize it, my response was, would you have said that then if everything Amber Heard had said there about throwing pots and pans, hitting, starting the violence, and not being able to promise not to do it again, would you have said that's not abuse for the reasons you just, if she was a man saying that to a woman?
Yeah.
Silence.
Yeah. Or maybe she blocked you.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. But I think there's something there about the level of ideology, and there are something. Well, yeah, but men are born with power and patriarchy and privilege and all this, so they can never be victims. And it's like, fine, if you want to believe that, I'm not going to waste my time trying to convince you otherwise. That's just what you think. But it doesn't matter. That the law is the law. The laws are there. And whilst there are problems with some elements of the law and gender and legislation, generally speaking, if one person harms this person, then from a legislative point of view, they're not going to care whether it's a man or a woman. They're not. It's harm and it's the abuse and all of that. Yes, there are problems with definitions and certain things. But I think sometimes we just have to take the gender out of it to kind of, not always. I think sometimes having the gender in it is very relevant. But if we say, if this person comes home from work and this person has cooked the tea and they've burnt it and this person hits that person, why, in that sense, that is bad, it's wrong, it's illegal, it's violence, it's abuse. Yeah. Now, the dynamic may or may not change depending on the gender of these people. But if we take that as a basic concept, that is violence, that is abuse. Now, some people go, yes, but the woman will be harmed more than the man. In some cases, absolutely. But what we're assuming there is that a man, on average, has got more physical, muscular strength than a woman. So that means he's
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen I've seen some graphs showing the gender differences in physical ability, and the single biggest one is punching power, actually. The average man hits harder, 160% harder than the average woman. So it's a terrifying statistic.
Yep. But as a lot of the research says, and if you look at sort of Nicola Graham-Kevin's research, Deborah Powney's research, women will use weapons, they'll throw things, they'll use a knife, they'll do things. And it's so again, there are differences. But I think to say, as some say, well, it's always worse when a woman is harmed by a man than a man is harmed by a woman. No, there's too many factors you need to consider. You've got to consider the context. You've got to consider lots of things. I know plenty of men that have said, do you know what? Her punching me in the face, or her boiling hot water over me, or her physically hurting me, that was preferable to her telling everybody that I raped her.
Yeah.
And the bruises can heal. The damaged reputation is a little bit different. And so, but again, there's research out there that says that in and I can't remember the exact numbers now, but in relationships where the violence is where the violence is initiated, it's generally the woman that initiates the violence more than the man. And when the woman does not initiate violence more than man, it's 50-50. I think that's right. I can never remember, but it's
the numbers I've seen kind of fluctuate around 70% if it's unidirectional.
But so many people ignore that data. So many people ignore it. And what they do is they'll go, no, let's just look at what the FBI data says. Let's just look at what police data says, the Office of National Statistics. But that all relies on people disclosing and saying something. We can't rely just on police data to give us an accurate picture. We can rely on police data to tell us what's reported and recorded, but what's reported and recorded tells us what's reported and recorded, not what's happening.
Yeah. Why do you think there is this one direction compassion going on? Why do you think that it's sort of treated as a limited resource, that if we share it for everybody, we're skimping?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I don't think I've got the answer to that. I've got theories and hypotheses, should we say? But I think that William Collins wrote about this in his book, didn't he? The Empathy Gap, where he talks about how we've got more empathy and compassion for girls and women and less for boys and men. I suspect it's because we think too simply sometimes, and we live in a black and white, good or bad, right or wrong. That sort of thing, and it's like, well, the oppressed and the oppressors. It's like, it's too simple. Life's not as simple as that. But you might want it to be, and you try and make it's not. And I think what happens is people often go through life. Some people go, they're thinking it's easier just to see women as these disadvantaged victims that need help and all of that, and men are bad and they've got it. It's really not as simple as that. It simply just is not. I think it's more accurate to say that there are disadvantages uniquely and disproportionately affecting girls and women. There are disadvantages uniquely and disproportionately affecting boys and men. There are disadvantages affecting us both perhaps equally, but just perhaps in different ways. And that's not hogging victimhood. It's not selfishly grabbing hold of victimhood. It's not making sure one people never get victim. It's about just acknowledging those things. I think one of the biggest reasons is, well, yeah, but the suffering by men is by men. The suffering men experience is by other men. Well, first of all, again, it's not as black and white as that. But even if it was, so the men are still suffering. The men are still suffering. It's still, it doesn't, I think if I was mugged by a man in the street, and I reported it to the police, now I don't want to hear, well, you're a man and the person who mugged you was a man. I don't care the sex, the gender, or anything. I know that I'm a man and I've been mugged, and as a man, statistically, I am more likely to get mugged in the street than a woman. Yeah. Whether it's by another man or another woman or whatever, I don't care. But what happens is you get people going, hang on a minute, the spotlight here, and you as a man is on you as a victim. No, we don't like that. We need to move the victim spotlight away from you, and we need to shine a spotlight on men as perpetrators. And because the person who mugged you is the same sex as you, then we can do that. Why? And it's hogging victimhood and not letting anybody else have it. And some, although it might be controversial to say, some believe that one of the reasons that happens is finances. In terms of funding and pots of money that's available. I mean, I'm not sure about that. Some people think that. I can see why they think that. But I think it's ultimate. People do not, some people, I've got to be careful what I'm saying, some people do not want to share victimhood. That's the blunt reality. And as controversial as it may be, there are benefits to holding on to victimhood sometimes.
Well, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
And there are, and I think in most cases, people, you know, for me, it's about, you know, so again, everything I said, language, think of the language that you use. But if we go with the word victimhood now, just for time's sake and argument's sake, it's about, well, yeah, we need to work with people to help them acknowledge that what happened to them is bad, abusive, wrong. We might say acknowledge you are a victim or were a victim. Yeah, we might not use that word, but But that's very different to saying identify as an eternal victim for the rest of your life. That's not helpful. I don't think it's healthy, and it's not empowering. But what you have is you do get certain groups of people that go, no, victimhood is ours, nobody else's. This is ours, not yours. We are the victims, you are the perpetrators. And but why are you doing that? No one wants to take victimhood away from you. We just want to kind of have it acknowledged over here as well. No, you can't do that. And people get angry and offended and all of that. But that is not what I see most people are trying to do. Most people.
That brings up an interesting question, though, that I just thought of is what would be your clinical diagnosis for that kind of behavior?
Well, as a therapist, I can't ethically diagnose, and I wouldn't want to. That's not
fair
my
enough.
profession.
Fair enough.
I would have my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
But I think, and it controversial, but I think ultimately, and this is the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing, and I know that anyone listening to this might disagree with what I'm about to say, and that's fine. This is just my opinion. I believe she manipulated and weaponized the concept of victimhood. And
don't think you'd be alone in thinking that.
I don't think I would be either. What I am saying, and I have to say this to be clear, I am not saying that everyone, male or female, who discloses abuse and rape, that they're all lying and they're all weaponizing. They're not, and I would say that the vast majority are not. The blunt reality is,
really, the only people who know what went on in the privacy of that relationship are the two of them.
Yeah, but the blunt reality is that there are ways that people can and do manipulate and weaponize victimhood to portray themselves as the victim when they are in fact the perpetrator. False allegations is one of them, all of this sort of stuff. There are a number of news articles, research that show how this has happened over time. What you get is you get certain groups of people minimizing that behavior, ignoring that behavior. I've worked with men where it was proven that they were accused of abuse, and it was proven that the person who accused them lied and made it up. They either said they lied for whatever reason. CCTV or a phone recording has shown absolutely without question that they lied, right? But in some cases, what the police did was say, right, you need to drop these charges and we'll leave it there. If you don't drop these charges, then we are going to pursue you for perverting the course of justice, I think what we call it, right? And so you get some people that go, right, okay, I'll drop it then. But the problem there is that information is not feeding into national statistics at all. And it should, and it needs to. And that's part of the problem. And so whilst, some would say false allegations are very, very minor and all of that, I think the last statistic I read was something about 3%. I'm not sure how accurate that is. But if we look at 3% of reported rapes in this country, that is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of men. That's still a lot of men that have been falsely accused. But what we do is no, isn't it bad to talk about hundreds of men? We can say 3%. The point is, it's how false allegations are used to abuse some of these boys and men in other ways as well. Yeah. along with physical abuse and sexual abuse.
Well, we're coming to the end of our agreed time.
Okay.
What would you say is, just one last question is, how would you summarize the current state of the mental health field? Is it
When it comes to boys and men, do you mean?
just in general? Like it sounds like it's in a bit of a turmoil in the sense that it's
Well,
being selective.
I guess generally speaking, if I had to describe it, it'd be underfunded and overstretched, regardless of sex or gender or whatever. You know, underfunded and overstretched. You know, there are people waiting months and months and months and months and months to see someone for an assessment, for some counselling sessions. You know, just getting an appointment for your GP, getting an appointment for your dentist is easier said than done. So I think, yeah, certainly underfunded and overstretched, certainly in demand. When it comes to boys and men, I won't say, you know, I don't know what percentage that I want to go, but I think it's certainly reasonable to say that when it comes to the provision for boys and men, because they often don't take into account male-friendly methods of working and things like that, I think it's inaccurate, or inappropriate rather, I should say, and that needs addressing as well.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. I am so lucky that you agreed to speak with me today. I'm going to include in the description all the links of how you can be contacted and followed on social media.
Okay.
And also probably some of the links of some of the names and books that you've mentioned during this talk.
Yep, that's fine. Yep.
Thank you so much. You're an amazing guy, extremely brave and kind, and you're one of the good ones. So thank you very much for talking to me today.
Not a problem. I appreciate it, Keith. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.